Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to one of our wonderful Wednesday webinars. And this week, for your webinar wisdom, we have the delight and delectation to have Jack Durant from the Young Wilders,
That's it.
fantastic group I met at Glastonbury. And I spent actually quite a long time at their stall chatting to them about what they were doing. Really
Yeah.
fantastic new youth movement, support the youth, planting trees and rewilding things. We all want to know more about the rewilding and the digging in for victory. So over to Jack. Thank you so much for coming. Tell us about the wild world. Over.
Amazing, yeah. So I'm gonna go in for a screen share type thing. Excuse me if this is a tad clumsy. I think we should be okay. Okay. So people seeing the whole thing right now. Yes, I
Yep.
see that you are. Okay. Let's get into it. Okay. Is that stuff coming up?
Just loading.
Hey, perfection. We did it. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming. It's a real pleasure to be here. So thanks so much to Phoenix for the invite. I'm really excited to hear more about what you guys are up to as well once I've kind of finished yammering. But yeah, I'm Jack. I'm a co-director at Young Wilders. We do youth-led nature recovery. I'm going to be talking a little bit about exactly what that means today. But yeah, the three stages on our journey today is that I'm going to be yammering about Young Wilders, like I just mentioned, and then I hope that well, I'm going to make a case at least to be hopeful for UK ecology, um, and then alert you to this kind of other issue that I think is emerging in lieu of like recent ecological successes, which I refer to as over professionalization. And I'd be really interested in hearing your guys' thoughts on how big a problem you perceive that to be when we get into the discussion session. So yeah, this there's a kind of pointless bit of context about my relationship with Phoenix. So this Phoenix mentioned we met at Glastonbury. This was our stall where Phoenix was hanging out for a little bit. And then this building on the right is currently abandoned in Monument in the City of London. And there's a kind of dingy, slightly creepy little room in there where we have our headquarters at the moment. And because it's an organization that kind of hooks up charities and nonprofits with disused office space. And by crazy coincidence, Phoenix also has one of the rooms on our corridor. So he just popped his head in the other day and asked us to come through, which is, yeah, huge pleasure. So fate has brought us here today. Also, two wonderful pieces of architecture for you guys to gaze at for a moment. So getting into the yammering, here are some propaganda images about the kind of stuff that we get up to. We basically have this twofold mission. The drum that we're always beating is nature recovery, ecological restoration in the UK, and getting young people involved in the process and the movement. And the way that we've been doing that so far is primarily with these youth-led nature recovery projects. We have around 10 at the moment. They vary loads in scale and type. There's one that's just a small flower meadow in Islington. Another one where we have much more of a kind of loose advisory role is around 100 acres. So they vary hugely in size and level of our involvement. Um, and we also do a kind of smattering of other more experimental youth engagement things. On the left, there's this yearly youth rewilding summit, we call it quite dramatically, which is at the Nep estate. So yeah, that's kind of more or less the broad spiel. Um, we have, oh yeah, one other thing I want to talk of, quite legendary that Raf's here because he was one of the fine persons that helped us out with this specific project. But I thought just to flash out a little bit more about what we've been getting up to, I talk about a thing that we did last year that I am especially proud of, which is this classroom that we made out of disused materials on a site that we've been working on. The site's called Maple Farm, and the classroom's called the Classroom at Maple Farm. And you can see on the left, we did a big volunteer build. The middle is the finished product, looking glorious, surrounded by some buttercups. It's really in a heavenly spot. And then on the right is the classroom being used by some local forest school kids, and then us using it at a ecological intervention, kind of young people's volunteer day in the bottom right there. Um, Part of the reason why I was wanting to talk about Young Wilder stuff is not just kind of to get the message out for our own sake and stuff, but also just because I think it's really I find it really reassuring to hear about other people who also care and are trying to do stuff. So I hope that some of this is making you guys feel a little bit like that. And in that vein, there's one more Young Wilders slide that I wanted to regale you guys with. And that was so I've got so as you guys will remember, the 25th of October last year was World Pasta Day. So I thought that was quite a neat bookend for this period that I wanted to talk about coming up to today. So I have these stats available because I was speaking to a possible funder yesterday. So it's quite a neat coincidence that I can kind of point to some numbers about the sort of stuff we've been getting up to recently. But we've done 6 volunteer days. I won't go over all of this because hopefully just the vibe is being communicated. But one thing that I think is kind of possibly interesting is that we have been speaking recently about this idea of instances of young wilding, which is our kind of term to describe any time when a young person has done an in-person act of compassion for nature. So maybe that's planting a tree, maybe that's scattering some wildflower seeds, maybe that's even just mulching a hedgerow or something like that. That's like kind of metric that we're always trying to dial up, basically. And there's been 115 of those over the winter. And then, 4,000 trees planted, some other stuff, which again, I hope is just nice to hear. And also, something that we're really proud of because we've only existed for 2 years, and progress inevitably with organizations when you start out is very glacial, and then it kind of picks up a bit. And I think we're at a slightly picking up moment, which has been amazing to see.
Can I check, Jack, what's the scholarship program?
Oh yeah, great for picking that out. So we have so Embercombe Rewilding. I'm not sure if you guys have come across them. Yeah, they're fantastic. If you guys haven't, they're doing the first rewilding specific course in the UK, and it's absolutely stacked with all of the kind of most prominent and most interesting rewildy types that at least I've come across. So really excellent course, and they agreed to hold a free place for us to assign to a young person who needed the financial assistance to get on the course. That was we established that a few months ago, and that person Shen is currently on the course at the moment, and it seems to be going really well. So yeah.
Right. Big campaign of the sliding scale and people with less incomes being able to access things. That's a really good thing.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think as I'll touch on in a little bit, nature conservation has a really massive access issue. And in our own small way, we're always trying to address that. So that's a nice example of a success there. So moving on from the Young Wildersy stuff, but obviously very happy to answer any questions you guys have at the end. I wanted to try and instill some hope. And I know it's going to be difficult because we're all exposed to a kind of deluge of like slightly scary, a deluge of pretty scary statistics on this stuff a lot of the time. But I have reason to be I'm naturally hopeful anyway, possibly to a fault, but I can justify the hope, and I hope that I'll do that now for you guys. So despite everything that I just said, the headline in our present context is that the UK is an ecological wasteland. And I have chosen these photos quite tactically because I think they're kind of an interesting thought experiment. On the left, we've got an area of wetland near Liverpool that's very visually, obviously polluted. It's got all kinds of debris and flotsam and jetsam washed up on it where reeds might have been. It's very kind of grim aesthetically. So we all kind of know the drill when we see something like that. We're like, that's bad. That's ecological destruction. But these other 2 images, one is of Dartmoor in Devon. I'm sure a lot of you will have been to. And then another one is in the Cotswolds, or definitely Oxfordshire, and there's a bit of farmland. And I've included these because I think visually they're very beautiful, but they actually represent total ecological devastation in both instances. Moorlands are, as we can see in the shot, have close to no vegetation and a kind of grassy monoculture due to just generations of overgrazing. And there's therefore going to be very, very little invertebrate life, very little bird life, and it's very starkly beautiful, but ecologically malfunctioning. And then on the right, again, it's glistening, it's green, it's beautiful, but there's very few trees. There could be all kinds of hedgerows going through there. It's obviously very intensively farmed, and that has all these chemical pollution aspects that emerge from that, which are terrible for waterways and also for human health outcomes as well. I just wanted to dwell on that because I think, certainly speaking for myself here, when I'm thinking about countries that have been devastated ecologically, I'm picturing often other countries and images kind of similar to this one on the left. And maybe slightly smugly thinking that although we're doing badly, we're doing okay-ish, but actually we're really, really not. I can't remember if I've already said this stat, but we're in the bottom 10% globally for ecological intactness. So that's something to really hold in mind. Yeah. Also the bottom of all the G8 countries. And we had I think we're in the bottom 5 in Europe for tree cover at about 13%. And for context, if we had the kind of natural amount of tree cover that we would have, the estimates vary, but the very lowest are in the kind of like mid 30s%. So really, really poor tree cover as well. You guys will be familiar with a lot of stats. They're very scary, but I guess, yeah, just taking a moment here to really try and process them to realize how bad things are now. But this is where the hope bit comes in, hopefully. So on the left here, there's a photo of this really gorgeous scroll that a friend of ours made, the Youth Rewilding Manifesto. That was at an event that we organized with Net back in 2022. It was the first event that we organized with them. And the reason why I've included that is because in preparation for that, I was saying some opening remarks and I was like, yeah, a little bit nervous about it. So my kind of big brain solution was to speak to as many older conservationists as I could and basically just parrot their words and just to say, I've spoken to some big brain people, here's what they've got to say. And the premise of all my chats over that summer was how has nature conservation world changed across your careers. So a lot of them were in their 60s and 70s, spend their whole careers doing nature conservation work. And I wanted to know how things had changed and how the problems we're facing now differ to the ones they were facing at the start of their careers. And basically there were kind of running threads between all of those conversations. Two recurring themes at least were that the public support for nature conservation is sky high now in a way that it hasn't been at any other point in their lifetimes. So it might not be as high as maybe we want it on this specific Zoom call. It definitely isn't. But it is astronomically high. And they were saying that when they were first talking about being kind of nature conservationists to people when they were in their 20s or whatever, it was a bit of a like pariah job. It was a bit of a like, if you mention it at a dinner party or something, people shuffle over a few steps. And it was considered to be kind of idiosyncratic and possibly like economically not especially useful, but kind of economically like slowing things down. All these kinds of thoughts that came up when I was chatting to these older conservationists. But they were saying that that's just not what happens now. There's at the very least a degree of interest, admiration occasionally, and a general understanding that what they're doing is really valuable. Obviously, this is incredibly anecdotal from a conversation with about 5 people, but it was still really great to hear, and it's something that I've heard more since then. And then I suppose reflecting that idea, there's also this other thing that came up, which is that the money has arrived for nature conservation. So this is a massive, massive, massive thing. They were saying that it was understood if you get into nature conservation when you're younger, firstly, you'll earn very little across your career. And also any kind of project work you try to do, there'll be no funding for it. And it's basically just constantly kind of clamoring for like very, very little. Whereas now, because of a whole bunch of programs, a lot of which have quite major flaws or certainly imperfect, a lot of money has arrived even just in the last 5 years. So we've got like biodiversity net gain type stuff that some of you will be familiar with. That started in February officially. There's also like kind of nascent carbon credit markets that are kind of building up. Again, a lot of these have major flaws that I'm sure you guys will be familiar with. But
you want to say a little bit about the biodiversity net gain? They're offering people some money to have more biodiversity on the land. Somebody was explaining.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a really huge part of the conversation at the moment. It's been brewing for a couple of years, but it's official. It's like it's legally what's the word? It's being applied now. Like any new development in the UK has to commit to a biodiversity net gain of 10%. And what that means is there's a bunch of kind of protocols that they need to do that will demonstrate how much biodiversity they're destroying through this kind of credit system, which, as you might imagine, it doesn't quite capture everything you'd want it to. But again, it's better than nothing. So you demonstrate how much biodiversity you're destroying in a development, and then you're committed to funding that level of biodiversity, ideally close to the site, plus 10%. So developers are required to put money into, say, like a wetland restoration nearby if they do a development that like damages a wetland in the area that they're in. So yeah, that's just one example. There's loads of other kind of things of like farmers getting together and taking payment for like their work on water courses. That's like private markets. So I've completely forgotten how that one works, but that's another good one. But yeah, there's basically like a whole host of things and like ESG commitments from companies and like things that councils are trying to do. And we as an organization have really been the beneficiary of all of these kind of different pockets of money that have been emerging. The thing is, though, and that's what the rest of this talk is going to be about, it's incredible that the money has arrived in these different forms. And this is not something that we would ever take for granted. And it's certainly something that we were told not to take for granted by all the conservationists. But it raises a whole host of new problems. Firstly, regarding like how to make those processes like actually work. And then a few other slightly kind of vaguer, more values-based issues that I want to get in for the rest of this. So yeah, this is kind of coming into the over-professionalization thought. And yeah, so so this is an example of a nature, like a youth-led nature recovery day that we did recently. I just picked this one at random. Back in November, we did something that we called Grovember, which had 35 young people come down to plant 700 trees at one of our rewilding sites in Essex. And they got, let's go. And we guarded them and deer fenced them and mulched them. And I think if everyone's on mute, or that doesn't particularly matter, but I think that is, come on, that was around. Let's get excited about that. That's huge. That's incredible. Let's go. Let's go. But unfortunately, you guys
come on, we want to see you all moving in your boxes. Are we excited about tree planting, people?
That's good. Unfortunately, if you did clap or even think about clapping just then you fell for my dastardly trap, because this fine young man here, Chris Lample, is one of the volunteers that came to that day. And he worked as a professional tree planter in Canada for a few years before moving back to the UK. And he said in his most productive tree planting day that he planted 1,500 trees in a single day, which you might recall is over double the amount that we planted last November. But I used this contrast not to kind of undermine Youngwilders' work, but to kind of encourage you guys to reframe any instincts you might have had on hearing that. And if any of those thoughts were, wow, Youngwilders looks fun, but that was a very kind of inefficient day you had compared to Chris's, I urge you instead to think of Chris's day as a kind of set of wasted opportunities. And that, in fact, we need a lot more of the Youngwilders type tree planting days, even though they might be kind of more inefficient in a bunch of ways that I will get into. So yeah, the basic kind of, this is obviously a kind of characterization and a little bit reductive, but the conversation I'm trying to bring up from that example is narrow nature recovery versus value plural nature recovery. These are slightly clunky names for different philosophies regarding how we should be restoring nature in the next decade. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of public goodwill and funding, which has kind of been the wind in our sails and in other nature recovery sails recently. And as a result, I'm feeling really confident that the next 10 years is going to involve a lot of really productive nature recovery work. But exactly what kind of nature recovery work that is, I think is going to be a really, really important thing. And my worry is it's much more of this narrow stuff than the value plural stuff. So I'm going to see if I'm going to try and do some techie stuff for a sec. If it doesn't quite work out, then it's no bother. Okay, yeah, maybe I won't actually. Do bear with. So basically, those two terms that I was just touching on in that last slide, understand narrow nature recovery as being this as this kind of nature recovery, which is done by contractors, it's done in a kind of walls up way. It's done in a box ticking way where the landowner or the organizations working on the land, they're trying to maximize the amount of money that they can gain from those different schemes I kind of loosely touched on in a previous slide. Whereas value plural nature recovery is closer to the kind of work that we're trying to do, which is community based. It's a bunch of volunteers coming down to a site. It doesn't have to adhere to these kind of box ticking money making schemes, and it involves like a lot more people, a sense of well-being, a lot of the access, obviously, because young people are being allowed onto the land in a way they wouldn't have been otherwise, and a bunch of other kind of very self-evidently good things that I'd like to kind of get into in a bit more detail in this next slide. So yeah, here are just kind of 5 of the things that sprung to mind when I was trying to sketch out the kind of benefits of our approach versus this slightly more contractor approach, which is becoming the norm in our world. So the first one is, you guys won't need me to tell you this, but being out in nature is excellent for your mental health. I'm kind of laughing because it's just so obvious that it's crazy how much ink has been spilled on like kind of scientific backing for this, something that's just like so like intuitively sound. But I did find some stats for this talk just in case anyone was after some. And there was a study in the Journal of Public Health that was published in 2022. It was a meta-analysis of 950 or so studies done on how time in nature affects different health outcomes. And it found that 98% had demonstrated some degree of positive mental health outcome. I didn't get into the weeds on exactly what that means in this context, but it's just kind of lending more fuel to the obviousness fire of being in nature, being good for your mental health. And so for the nature connected one, this is a slightly kind of trickier notion, I suppose, because it's not always clear what this means, I find. But if we're imagining these kind of caricature moments of nature recovery, say we've got like 4 or 5 contractors kind of just machine gunning trees into the ground and like tractor digging ditches to let streams through to get these kind of credits or whatever it is they're doing, versus 30 people having a whole day down in nature, doing things with their hands, being taught about what they're doing, being taught about its value. And then also just like having a good time. Like fun is like a very valid and exciting outcome as well. The nature connectedness in the second instance, and this is something that we measure with surveys after we do our work, is very high. Like people describe feeling more connected to nature after doing the kinds of work that we do. There's some other studies backing this out. There's a guy called Miles Richardson, who I urge you guys to check out if you're interested in any of this, who does nature connectedness research about like the psychology of nature connectedness. I think he works at the University of Derby, and he has these 5 pathways that a lot of nature organizations kind of use in the way when they're devising policy and stuff about different things you can do to feel more connected to nature. And one of them is compassion, I think he refers to it as, which is basically just an act of care for nature. So being in nature itself, just like exposure, is a really good thing. But actually doing nature recovery work, and like, for example, the kind of stuff we do, is actively helps with nature connectedness. The education one's pretty straightforward. Just if we want we need a generation of people to be environmentally literate. And we need them to feel comfortable in nature and excited by it, and again, like emotionally connected to it. And none of those things happen when we have the narrow nature recovery thing going on. We don't get any of that. All of that potentiality is lost. Just to use our own stuff as an example, in all of our days, we try and have these educative aspects where we're letting people know about the project and like the kind of broader picture, and obviously teaching people how to plant trees, for example, or how to remove like certain invasive species like giant hogweed or whatever it is. And even if they don't end up working in nature recovery professionally, it's still in everyone's interest to have a whole generation like knowing about these things and knowing how to do these things. And then, yeah, the community and fun thing is just a point of like, I've been to these days, we've done, I'm going to say maybe 20 now as an organization, and it's so good. It's just so insanely fun. It's just a lot of people having a really good time. And like this sad thing to me is that if the narrow nature recovery timeline kind of wins out, things lean more that way than the way that I would like them to be. There's just so many good times that people will be deprived of, and it kind of seems like a bit of a superficial thing, but I really don't think that it is. And then yeah, this one, quality of work, is an interesting one. So I think there's a lot of room for discussion here. Hopefully we can get into that once I finish rambling. But one thing that people would tend to say whenever I bring up this kind of like narrow nature recovery versus value plural stuff is that surely the professional contractors or whatever are like doing this work much better. And when I'm bringing these kind of amateurs down, they're having a great time, like I mentioned, great for mental health, all these kind of benefits, we must at least concede that the kind of work that happens as a result of it is of a lower quality, because a lot of these people are planting trees for the first time, for example. But I don't have any hard and fast kind of half remembered stats for you guys on this. But I can say that the Tree Council, who are a fantastic organization, and I really, really recommend you check them out. I'd say of all the organizations we've worked with, they have an insanely outsized impact. They've got a team of like 15 and they're doing unbelievably impressive stuff. But anyway, they did a study which I can remember the core details of, which was measuring. So they planted, they had 2 planting events around the same time, tree planting. And they're really into tree establishment rather than planting, because they understand once you've planted it, that's just the first moment. And actually, there's a lot of aftercare. There's a lot of planting it well, which is really important. It's not just like sapling in the ground, job done. And basically, they had some contractors do one section of trees, and some first-time volunteers, more at the kind of days that we do, doing the other side. And then 5 years later, came back to test the survival rate. And for the amateurs, it was 95%. And for the contractors, I'm going to get this slightly wrong, but I think it's 60%. I want possibly 58%, but crucially, much, much lower. And then their idea from those kind of that difference in statistics is that volunteers and people who've come down just to have like fun and because they love nature are planting these things with a lot of care. So they might be doing it slowly, but they're really listening to their instructions. They're really making sure every tree is doing well. Whereas contractors, again, with this over professionalization thought I mentioned and this narrow nature recovery scheme maximization stuff, are just like most amount of trees in the day, bang, 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 bang. And inevitably there's slips in quality there. This is just an example in the context of tree planting, but it would apply to other kinds of ecological intervention as well. I think the point to take away from this is not necessarily that amateur work in nature recovery is like always better, but that it isn't necessarily worse. And it's better in this whole host of other ways that I've kind of touched on so far. And that main concern of quality, I just don't think holds up under scrutiny, basically. So yeah, the main thing really, I guess, to take away from this is that I really do think that UK ecology is in an excellent place. I don't think this is the same for the rest of the world for various kind of concerning reasons. But there's a lot of money, there's a lot of public support. There's actually the Conservatives, no need to get too political now, not personally a huge fan of their work, but at least in some environmental instances are doing much better than equivalent parties around the world. And I think that the UK in 10 years is going to be a much wilder and much more nature-friendly place than it is now. I really believe that, and I think that's fantastic. But there are these kind of whole host of emergent issues that come from that, all stemming from this narrow nature recovery stuff that I think we should be alert to. I think if we extended this conversation, it would also include things like greenwashing, which is a kind of nice problem to have because it demonstrates that money and public support is for green stuff. And therefore they do the kind of green dance to maintain those two things. But it still is a massive problem, as is this kind of broader over-professionalization concern. And yeah, looking forward to chatting to you guys about it. And if you agree with me that this is the kind of place we find ourselves in. Oh, sorry, one final thing. If you want to chat after this, my email address is down there, which is just jack@youngwilders.uk. But yeah, that's everything.
Oh, absolutely smashing it out the park. That's fantastic. just say from the older activist generation, it's amazing work you're doing. It's really, really, really important. We've got to give people hope. Got to give people a feeling that we can do something. And I think 50 years ahead, plant a tree, they say, but we also need to be planting hemp, which absorbs 40 tons of CO2, I think, and kelp, apparently, which absorbs CO2. But
That's
Really
cool.
interesting work you're doing. That's fantastic. So,
Thanks so
if,
much.
thank you, thank you, thank you. If anyone's got a question or a feedback, doesn't have to be a question, a comment, a feedback, something you want to chat about, there's a reactions tab down the bottom there, little smiley face. You can stick a hand up. We can see who's one, two, three. First off the buzzer, Andy Wright, London-ish. Andy.
Hello, yes, that's great. Obviously, I'm kind of familiar with rewilding anyway, but I guess the obvious question I'll ask is, how is it possible to get more involved with the young rewilders, especially if you might be an old fart like I am?
Well, I mean, to be fair, as people do point out to us, our age range is 18 to 30, and I'm 28 now, so I'm going to be joining the old fart community by our own definition pretty soon. Um, but basically, the all of our kind of in-person work and those nature recovery days that I mentioned is fairly strictly age limited. Um, but there is loads of other ways to support us. Actually, maybe Andy, if you have any specific thoughts that you any specific ways you want to help us, maybe you can email me. But for other people, basically spreading the good word, donations, yeah, obviously our lifeblood, and then other ways are, yeah. Actually, to be fair, it's in-person events is the young people specific stuff. There's we've been talking about expanding like conversation style events like discussions and stuff outside of ecological work as being like broader age range, because people have like basically been advising us, and it's a point that I'm really taking on board now, that although being youth led has all these kind of fantastic aspects to it, and we want to keep doing things that way, the one thing it does deprive us of is a lot of like wisdom, basically. There's a lot of people who've been doing this kind of stuff for a really long time, and we've learned a lot of things the hard way, and I think we wouldn't have had to learn them in such a hard way if we'd let a bit more kind of old head wisdom into the team. So basically, yeah, if there is anyone here over 30 interested in getting involved, just email me, and there'll be lots of kind of informal ways to do that.
I guess the obvious question I'd ask is, obviously we've got a community food growing project at the Climate Emergency Centre that we're running, and it is interesting that most of the people there are actually a lot older. So I'd be curious about maybe finding out if there's anyone in the local area who is possibly younger who might be interested in helping out with our community food growing project, because there are a few actual allotments and other things around us as well. So
yeah,
it's almost like really spreading that word incredible kind of thing.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to chat to you about that, Andy. We have a really lovely problem we have, although frustrating as well, is that we have a bunch of volunteers on our mailing list, younger volunteers who are asking us for opportunities, and either they can't do the stuff we're doing because they're too far away, or it doesn't work with their timetables, and sending them to something like you would be fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, I'll drop you an email then. Yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Andy, if you've got any web link to what you've done there with the food growing project or anything from Talking Tree, that would be
unfortunately, we've not actually got a website specific for the Incredible Edible, which is basically obviously part of the network yet. But yeah, it's a good point. We should probably do one, but we haven't got one yet, unfortunately.
Okay. Great work you're doing. Staines was CEC number 2, and
so cool.
Andy and Ness and all the crew doing amazing work. Raphael, am I pronouncing that right? Raphael?
Yes, you are. Hello.
Hey,
hi, how's it going, Jack? Whoops. Yeah, I mean, I'm an architect in training, and I didn't realize there were two kind of nature recovery veins, and I guess I've been doing a lot of work with narrow nature recovery.
Yeah.
Without meaning to. And it's kind of I mean, on the one hand, obviously the BNG is a fantastic development that we've been we're putting a couple of buildings towards planning now.
Sorry, BNG. Sorry, explain
the biodiversity net gain criteria, where 10% more of your damage has to be replenished, basically.
Yeah.
As Jack was saying. But yeah, it's kind of absurd that there are professional enterprises aimed at just professionally box ticking, which is what we've been doing. And I guess there's a question I don't know if you know anything you'll be able to answer, but have you ever worked on rewilding or management of listed gardens?
Listed gardens?
Wow. Yeah, is that something you've ever worked on before?
I
out
don't
of
think I
curiosity.
knew gardens could even be listed until just now. So I guess no is the answer to that. But
Okay,
that's
fair enough.
really cool that you're doing that.
Yeah, well, the conservation of a listed garden is well, very tricky to do with heritage England, historic England. But it's something I might drop you a message about.
Yeah,
And
please.
yeah, I'll give you a bit more detail. And also, Andy, um, about your allotments, is there some way that I can find out more about what that is? Because I've never heard of it before. I mean, allotments, obviously, I don't know what your specific thing is.
Yes, I mean, but basically we've got two allotments that we're kind of attached to, and we've also got a project at Staines Station, which is basically a small plot of land we're just growing food on. So, but you can always drop me an email. If you want to stick your email in the chat, I can always email you about that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll do that
I'll
now.
DM private message you with that. Yeah.
All right, amazing, cool. Cheers.
Anyone who wants to make any comment, feedback, or anyone who hasn't spoken, or anyone who wants to share there? I'm thinking if someone could find Incredible Edible and post the website, would be good. Habiba, and then maybe Hugo had something.
Yes, yummy. It's like getting comfortable, getting people from a young age to, feel comfortable just being in nature, essentially, which is giving access to, so they're not like uncomfortable. So so they just can just relate to it like a more family feel. So it's great and supporting your work. Thanks.
Incredible. Yeah.
Nice one.
Completely agree.
Nice one, Habiba. Hugo and then Genji of the North Sea.
Hi, thanks, Jack. I suppose you were talking about the next 10 years and what the next 10 years looks like.
Yeah.
And something that that I think of, it's not sort of particularly novel, but is about moments in time when I suppose there's a big societal shift. And this idea of yes, okay, you could pay lots of money. There could be lots of money available for this type of work, nature restoration. But actually, the shift that I think of is more to instead of sort of national service for the military, there's actually nature restoration. And I think that does lots of things, as I'm sure. But I mean, I like in that 10-year period. I mean, like the sort of the awfulness of how where we are is that in that 10-year period, I can imagine. I mean, I hope that maybe that sort of societal response, and organizations like yours will be, if you like, all of the work you're doing is sort of laying the groundwork for this. And I mean, I love the description of how it's this value plural approach, because I think the project I'm involved in here is also like, it's hard to sort of talk about it in a narrow sense. It's doing so many things.
Absolutely.
And so like a National Nature Restoration Service is like, it's not just doing one thing. If you had millions of people, and it doesn't have to be like, when you leave school, everyone spends a day or two. It could be like, anyone any age. I mean, I know this is, youth wilders, but like any age can like engage in that. That was a bit of a rant. I don't think there's a question there, but it's just
that's a lot.
Maybe like
I love that thought. I really ascribe to that idea that although we have all of these kind of different environmental issues at the moment, it's like kind of watercourse pollution, there's like deforestation, obviously climate change, all kinds of different things. They all stem from this like core issue, which is an emotional disconnection to nature at the societal level. And that a lot of the kind of behaviors that lead to all the destruction that we've been seeing, you just wouldn't see that destruction because the behaviors wouldn't emerge, because it wouldn't even cross your mind to do these things, because nature's worth is so intuitively obvious. And it's, I know this often comes up when people talk about this, but it's not like humans can live like that. I think some people have this idea that we just like consume mindlessly in all contexts and like we're doomed to destroy ourselves, but we really aren't. And there's loads of points in history that humans have proved that. And I guess there's just this like this huge task really of just getting back to that mindset. And I think we can do it. I think your idea of the Nature National Service is a dramatic one that I think there'd be a lot of haters for, but I personally absolutely love. I think it would be a really good way to do take that challenge on.
If I could just say one thing in response, which is the, I suppose, the National Nature Restoration Service idea.
Yeah,
it's a very top down.
Yeah.
Whereas I think what you were describing is like a point where society, as a society, there's just behaviors which would just be unacceptable. People just wouldn't do it.
Wouldn't cross your mind.
It just wouldn't cross your mind because it's just not, it's just not our relationship with nature. Like we've reached that place.
Yeah,
I think for me, it's like that sort of way of being is maybe not in the next 10 years. Maybe that's, maybe it's actually a generational, shift. But between now and then, there may need to be actually a sort of
I think
in the balance of things, more
definitely
than we might hope for.
I think that's very appropriately, delicately worded, and I completely agree. I think we just have, it's such a obvious emergency. I mean, the clue's in your guys' name, and I think we just have to consider kind of every option. And even if we might be opposed to kind of top-down type things in the broader sense, I think there's certainly it's worth considering in this instance because of kind of the level of emergency that we're dealing with. So I agree.
We need to mobilise folks on a major level. So coming over from Hugo of the High Weald, who looks a bit like to me he's in a submarine, to Genji of the North Sea. Over. Yellow Submarine calling.
Thank you so much, Jack. And thanks everybody here. It's really great to be here together. So yeah, I'm really also following up from what Habiba and everybody, a few people have mentioned here. This whole thing that the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis are a crisis of relationship. In a nutshell, that is what's going on. And when I say relationship, I mean the relationship within our own body, between our own being able to feel our lungs, our own heart, the inner landscape of relationship and the outer landscape of relationship. And this, of course, is what the indigenous folk all the time have been telling us. Well, maybe they didn't realize we weren't doing it. That's what also occurs to me. This reciprocity that we can actually feel the so-called outer world in the inner world. And so to me, that's what all of those 5 things that you were pointing to there, mental health, nature connectedness, education, they're all actually, in my sense, they're all pointing to relationship. And I'm just, this is the Arts Council bit I've just put in, and I'm really up for chatting to you more, Jack. If we can, I'm working with some other people. Phoenix has been in one of the workshops. Very, very simple practices to bring us back into relationship. Very sensory, very simple. Can you feel your feet on the ground? When the birds fly overhead, what happens in your actual body, not as an idea, but as an action? Amazing. So I'm just like really behind you. And if, I will contact you if there's some way that the work that I'm doing can help support what you little darlings are doing. That'd be totally awesome.
That's amazing. I mean, I couldn't agree more. That's beautifully put. And I really like the emphasis on it being a relationship, because that just shows the kind of like detail and how like emotionally satisfying it can be when you get into it. And also highlights the fact that it's something that's kind of been broken or that we're estranged from. Thank you.
Thank you. So this dislocation that somehow happened in our culture, but let's also remember this culture isn't that old, not really. When we consider the DNA that's running through us for billions of years, you know what I mean? So I'm also with you with the hopefulness, Jack, by the way. I'm totally with you on the hopefulness.
Awesome.
Love it. Love the laughing that you're doing quite a lot of the time, by the way. I'm another big laugher. Often apologising for it. Thank God Phoenix, people like Phoenix are saying it's all right, Jen, you can laugh.
We love it. We love Jen's workshop. We laughed. She laughed. We laughed the way through. We love Jen. I think it's good to, humour is one of the best things to keep community centres going. I've used a lot over the years. I'm not sure whether Raphael's hand's still up there or from earlier.
I could jump in with just a quick comment on the nature connectedness stuff. if anyone is finding themselves being especially interested in that kind of framing as that being the core issue and stuff, there's an amazing book by Caroline Merchant called The Death of Nature. I'm not sure if anyone here has come across that, but she's an environmental historian. I think she's still alive, working in Berkeley. And she wrote this sometime in the 80s. And the whole idea is that she was like tracking the change in Western societies from understanding nature more intuitively and holistically and reverentially, into this more mechanistic kind of like science focused, like breaking things down into atoms, seeing nature as something to be exploited rather than something that like cares for us. All of those kinds of small shifts that we're referring to, she like documents it in amazing detail and kind of helps us understand how it happened, I guess, to give us the tools to sort of undo the process in some way.
Nice. I think someone's found it and put it in the chat. Just a bit on relationships. We'll come over to Hugo and then Debs. It was, the Native Americans and the indigenous people talk about being in right relation to Mother Earth and the two-leggeds and the winged people and things. And, wow. We need to work as humans to reconnect with nature and with our relationships with nature, because we've brought it to the point of absolute destruction of so much. Hugo, then Debs, and then anyone else who hasn't spoken who wants to share. Any sisters, any brothers? Hugo, Debs, over.
Yeah, I was going to say, Debs, do you want to go? Because I've already had some time. So.
All right, thanks. I'm just thinking because I'm in the middle of making myself some compost while I'm sat here. I'm sorting myself some compost out because now I've retired from the CEC business. I am now going to be gardening, and I just can't wait. Just knowing that I can go out like at least once or twice a week into my own garden, and I'm a great believer in like doing your own corner of the earth, do your own patch.
Incredible.
And then, but I really need to rewild my garden at the moment. It's like forming a lake out there. I've got a mop.
That's awesome. I think gardening is like a really amazing way to build that kind of relationship that we're speaking about. So yeah, you're doing a lot's work, Debs.
Thanks.
Very important. Dig in for victory, as the old campaign of the war said.
Yeah, Jack, you mentioned about access.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I apologies if I missed it, but
I didn't. No, you didn't miss a thing. Yeah, I'm afraid that presentation I gave was a slightly kind of last minute hodgepodge of other presentations I'd done. So I promised to speak about things I didn't. But I think thanks so much for bringing that up, because it is a gigantic issue in nature conservation. And it's an issue in lots of different industries. But the whiteness in environmentalism is a real like standout amongst standouts, because I can't remember exactly what the stat is, but the environmental sector is the whitest industry after farming, like statistically proven. And there's a whole host of reasons behind that. A lot of them are kind of just like theorized. One very obvious one, which also has a lot of class issues attached to it, obviously, as well, is that the nature conservation expects an insane amount of free work, like really an amount that you'd probably be arrested for if you tried in a different industry. There's someone that works with us at Youngwilders. It's a really lovely guy called Connor, who did a 3-day-a-week job for I think a year, and it was unpaid. And I think that is like there's no I think that would literally be in the news if that was another industry. And I think it's because they're capitalizing on the fact that it's like a passion job. I think they also understand that it is quite a posho white pursuit, and a lot of these people have the resources to be able to, like parental resources, to be able to do these volunteer positions for incredibly long periods of time. I also think there's a conversation about cities being more racially diverse, and then the countryside being whiter, and all of this work being in the countryside. So there's like a geographic aspect to it as well. But basically, so yeah, that's like socioeconomic, like ethnic access issues, just like very clumsily touched on. And there's also land access issues, which is another massive thing that you guys might be more familiar with than me. But I'm speaking about like right to roam type stuff. A lot of these nature conservation projects trying to take down public paths to lower foot traffic, seemingly for the good of nature. But obviously, if we're going to build a relationship with it, we can't just have these walls up projects that aren't letting people experience it. It seems like a very self-defeating thing to me. So yeah, I don't know if that was any useful information, but I think it's a huge thing, and we're trying to address it in our own small way all the time, basically.
Back there from Hugo, was there a quick one back, and then Helen?
Yeah, just a quick one. Which is, I think Phoenix, we've talked about this before, which is I mean the project that I'm involved in, which is only 40 minutes on the train from London Bridge, heading south into the Weald, and just being like aware that there are millions of people who are not so far away, who we could be connecting with, and there are all sorts of barriers that we're aware of.
Absolutely,
and London's not unique in that dynamic, but just that urban-rural divide, and like finding ways of bridging it, but also finding ways of like it not being sort of so like you are hosting a group. It's finding ways where the group feels that they, even in a short space of time, feel like they have some, and this is like a dirty word, but like some ownership of a space or place, and ownership, as I say, it is not the right word, but reach that relationship with that bit of land, with that bit of nature,
absolutely,
which feels special to them, and is not, it's not like because they've been given permission, which I suppose
connection might be a good word, and getting in tune with. Helen, we're coming towards the end of our timelines, but Helen, and then anyone else who hasn't spoken, who wants to share anything, or just what you thought about tonight. Any quick feedback there, whether it's Megan, Catherine, Christine, or Will, or Linda? Helen.
I was actually thinking that this right to grow, or getting people involved in growing, maybe is a way of getting more ethnic people involved in the climate movement, because I've worked as a driving instructor, and being female, I've had a lot of Asian customers, because a lot of them won't let their daughters learn with a male instructor. Not so much now, but when I started, there were some people who've been waiting 8 years to find an instructor, And what I saw was a lot of them in their little terrace street garden were growing various herbs and things to make traditional foods that they maybe didn't get so much.
It's a really natural human instinct, isn't it?
Yeah, and another bit was there was a park in Hare Hills, which is a very Asian area, and the cherry trees were absolutely stripped because they realised that there were all these free cherries going on the trees. But I wonder whether part of it is they don't think they've got the right to go and grow on, sort of community land. And maybe just getting that message across that, yes, you can.
Yeah.
Is a way to connect.
I think there's a big aspect. There's these are great reflections, Helen. I know that it's a real cross-cultural thing to want to connect to nature and to like kind of cultivate a natural space and work with it. And I think that's one thing that's an advantage for us in trying to diversify the sector, is that like humans of like from all backgrounds love this kind of thing and want to be spending time in it. So the urge is there. I think to Hugo's point, making space for people to have kind of agency and to form their own relationships with it and see themselves in nature, rather than kind of like prescribing things or possibly being like patronizing, or like all these other kind of issues you could run into, seems really sensible. One small way we try and do that is by understanding our limits, our like positionality limits. As being quite a crusty posho white guy myself, there's only so much our story and the work we do is going to resonate with certain groups, because they just have a different story. And I think working with other groups who are more ingrained in those communities, who are doing work and are kind of leading it from the inside, and working with them rather than trying to do it ourselves, I think is quite like a natural way to do the sort of like space making that Hugo was touching on, obviously.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of aspects and things here. One of the biggest elephants in the room, you know, is access to land, and that, you know, 5% of the population is owning 75% of land, or whatever the exact figures are. We should get Guy Shrubsole on, who did the
who owns
Britain.
Yeah.
Right to Rome a couple of weeks ago, the author Nick Hayes' Right to Rome campaign and Trespass book. And, you know, land distribution is a major issue, and access to land is a major issue. And it does, you know, we've run a lot of centres in inner city London, and lots of people do want space to grow food. You get a tiny little allotment space sometimes, but there was a great, just to spiel a little bit at the end, while other people are thinking, anyone else who wants to make a comment at the end or last question. So, you know, there was a great website years ago called it was something like landshare.net, and it lifted off for a bit, but they didn't really go there. And the idea was somebody who was a larger landowner who had 10 plus acres, or someone who had pensioners who had a very large garden. You could put it on this landshare thing, .net, and then some young students who wanted to plant up half of an old people's garden or work on a few acres could grow some food there, and then give whatever it was, a percentage of the stuff that was grown to the pensioners or to the landowner. And that sounded like a brilliant idea to me. It was a great way of directly sharing land. And we need to keep working on these kind of things, because there is farmers out there who are really struggling, who are looking for people. And I suppose just to burble a little bit at the end was, you know, we've got some different land kind of projects that want to link up on being CEC network type of stuff. And we want to cross-pollinate, have a kind of, you know, a group in the city linked to a land space that they can go with an agreement with the landowner on certain times of the year and times, and then go and help them plant trees, or, you know, help with work on the land growing food, relax, get into nature. It's clinically proven to help with your mental health, putting your hands in soil and other things. So, you know, how we can link this up. Our long-term dream is that, you know, we can go from 30 to 40 to 50 climate emergency centres in one weekend in November. Some friends did this plan before lockdown, like 1 weekend, 4 directions, north, east, south, and west. They planted 1,000 trees or something. So the dream would be maybe we could get together with groups like the Youngwilders and the Plant a Tree Foundation and Tree Sisters and Tree Musketeers and a whole load of other groups, and have all of these 30 centres linked to one bit of land, and go and plant, you know, 1,000 trees that suddenly be 30,000 trees in a go. You know, we've got to really mobilise and get really organised. So really excited to see Youngwilders coming in today, and let's keep the relationships going. Any last comments from people? Just, you don't have to have a whole question or feedback. Anything you want to say just about what you thought tonight? Anyone who hasn't spoken is good facilitating skills. What did you think of tonight, folks? A few lines. You can put it in the chat, or you can say it verbally. Over.
Brutal feedback welcome, by the way. Feedback of all kinds is a gift.
I enjoyed the chat. It was really good. Thanks very much for the talk. My name's Andy. I'm a keen gardener. I like to plant trees and plants out on the street where I can, not loads. If I can afford to get some seedlings or some small plants, I'll put them out. I live in Athens mainly, and there I've got a balcony where I've made a raised bed. I'm trying to grow some of my own veg and some fruit trees and stuff like that. So always keen to just hear about things like this. And yeah, I'm also interested in the topic of rewilding. So yeah, thanks very much. Really enjoyed that.
Awesome.
Nature, you know, believe it or not, you know, we've got such a wide gap between us and it now, but we give something to it and it gives something, like it takes from us. We take from it, but also the idea is that it takes from us as a natural organic thing to feed off in some way. And we've lost that link. We've gone all commercial and packet.
Nice. Megan, what did you think?
I accidentally sent it to only you, I realized in the chat. I just said it's great to attend a climate meeting with like hope being the main takeaway rather than like being like forced into doing something.
Definitely. I'm glad you felt that.
Thank you for saying that. I've been on a long-term campaign to say we've got to push the solutions, and we've got to be real about the doom situation, the doom info, but you've got to give people hope and you've got to give them solutions and things that they can do. Otherwise, we feel people feel like giving up. So thanks for saying that, Megan. Anyone else for final feedbacks, Christine was there, or Mr. Will Farr-Brother of the Green Union team.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Yeah, that was really uplifting. So thanks.
All right, put something in the chat. I think Hugo's got word there. Just we're on the last 5 minutes, and we'll stop the recording. People can stay around. For those that need to go can go, but we do have a little new tradition of leaving the Zoom on for 15 minutes if people want to chat after the recording stopped. So I'm okay. Hugo, did you want to bung in that?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a lovely chat, and I put it in the meeting chat as well, which was just to say that, like, and this is probably not just directed to you, Jack, but anyone on the call really, which is like the project that I'm involved in here is, it's so aligned with this. It's about nature connection, it's about access, it's about nature restoration, all of these things, and yeah, we're not far from London, so yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, and Jack, like, if we can be supportive in any way, then I think that could be quite exciting. And I've shared this with Phoenix before, but there's this project which is like a community project, which is what I'm talking about, but also it's very close to my dad's farm, and so there's a lot of he's of a certain generation, let's say, but there's a lot of potential for nature restoration work, which is right there. So
that's really cool.
And Raphael, about architecture, there's a potential build. We're at the pre-planning stage, trying to do something interesting and of service to more people at this time. Anyway, I'll stop talking. But
thank you. Great inputs. Will, you're looking for a dapper there. Do you want a last input? Well, I'll stop the recording. We can keep chatting.
Are you talking about Dares, Hugo? Yeah, great. I mean, it's one of the most uplifting places I've been in quite a long time. It's almost unreal that somewhere could be so close to London, yet fill you with so much. It's just some of my fondest memories of going foraging for mushrooms around there in the autumn. Thank you for that. Thank you for that presentation, Jack. I really enjoyed it. Really good, really good. I'm sorry, apologies, I missed the start, so I sort of missed the kind of framing at the beginning. I think the thought I had, I don't know if this is helpful, but it seems that the biggest barrier to more rewilding is nature destruction that goes on through development and the construction sector. And I wondered if there's more we could do to organise around monitoring that and protesting it. But they have to publish. They kind of have to publish all the planning applications. And is anybody systematically going through those and saying, look, because I feel like stuff gets sneaked past us because we're not as vigilant as we could be. Yeah, just thought a young techie person might have a whizzy solution to that. And it's the thought on my mind anyway. But thanks for the presentation, and thanks, Phoenix, for hosting this.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, last words to Jack of the Really Wild Youngwilders, who are exciting new movement that's really making it happen. So get involved, find out about them, go along and plant a tree today and get rewilding the world. Jack, over to you for last words.
I think that covers everything pretty nicely. Thanks so much for having me. I think I really admire your guys' community-focused approach to climate change stuff. All of these problems are so massive and caused by systems that feel so outside of our own agency. And I think the kind of work you guys are doing is like a really perfect antidote to that. So just wanted to express my admiration and thank people for listening.
Bless. All right, tune in next week. Lots of love. We'll stop the recording there.